Come to school, Slack.
There you go. All right, so set up your page. You guys who are online, take a minute and pause whenever you need to, but take a minute now and set up your page. You guys have your pages set up? Set up your pages.
Or you can go to the end of this video and just copy down the notes.
Or you could have a brain and use it. There's that, Andrew. Okay, so this is is this Tuesday? Yeah, 3-9. Unit 10, biochemistry, we have 2 more. And this is, what period is this? 5. Okay, so we're on B9B. Okay, so B9B says you're going to compare the reactants and products. So you know that you're going to do some chemistry right here. Compare the reactants. Reactants, if I can spell it today. Reactants and products of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And they always say cellular respiration because if they just said respiration, you guys would think, oh, I'm just inhaling and exhaling. And that's not what we're talking about. Cellular respiration is totally different from that. Now, you're going to compare reactants and products of these 2 reactions in terms of. That means they want you to know about energy. Okay, so remember capital E in any science class is energy. Energy conversions, what do we change the energy from and to? And matter. Okay, so when we have this equation, we want to know, well, what's going on with the energy, how are we changing it, and what are we dealing with matter in that instance here. So the first thing you're going to have to do, and I guarantee you it's going to be on the test, it's going to say write the equation for photosynthesis.
Oh, it's
Okay, so what do plants need?
Sunlight.
Sunlight, so let's put light down. Is light matter?
glucose is what they make.
Hey, is light matter?
Yes.
So it has atoms. I can take a cup of light and measure it, how much it weighs on the scales? No, then it's not matter. Light is energy.
Well, you can measure light still.
You cannot measure the mass of light. It has no mass.
Half.
It has no volume. Yep. It has energy. So can we measure energy? Yes. You cannot measure light, though. You can't measure the mass of energy because it has no mass. So everything in the universe is either matter or energy. Either matter takes up space and has mass, yes? That's the definition for matter. Takes up space, has mass. Light doesn't take up space, does it? That means it doesn't have a volume. It doesn't have mass. Question?
What about the sun?
That is the thing that generates the energy. It's made of hydrogen and helium, so different substance. It's the energy coming off of that in the form of light that doesn't have mass.
Wait, if it's just made out of hydrogen and helium, how much would it weigh?
It is the light.
No.
How much would the sun weigh if it's just made out
Yeah.
of hydrogen?
So write that question down. Discuss philosophy later. You can talk with me after class about that. Okay, so light energy. What else do plants have to have in order to carry out photosynthesis?
Carbon dioxide.
Okay, so what do they have to have?
Carbon dioxide.
They must have carbon dioxide, and I want you to leave a little blank right here. What else must you give plants?
Water.
Water. This, and only this, is what the plants have to have in order to carry out photosynthesis. They need carbon dioxide, they need water, they need some kind of light energy. Once they have that, they produce 2 things.
Oxygen and
Okay?
glucose.
So what's the formula for glucose? C what?
C6H12O6.
Plus, and I'm going to put a line right here. You're going to balance this in just a minute.
Okay.
And you said oxygen. How do I write oxygen?
O6
Close.
or 2.
O2. O2, oxygen is one of those diatomic molecules. It's never by itself. It's always in a bond with another oxygen atom when it's pure. All right. Now I'm going to grab a pencil because sometimes when I balance equations or when you have this balanced equation, it throws people off a little bit. So if you're going to use the same marker or whatever that you're using right now, make it small. So when I balance this equation, you don't have to worry about balancing it. It's a tough one here. This balances with 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O produces C6H12O6 plus 6 O2. The 6's are there for balancing it. If I wanted to put a number here, I would put a 1. And that balances it all out here. So the 6's are just for balancing the equation because we have to follow the law of conservation of mass. However many atoms we started out with, that's how many atoms we have to end up with. They didn't disappear out of the universe. So here I have 6 carbon atoms on the left. I have 6 carbon atoms on the right. So law of conservation of mass. Okay? Now, when I look at this equation, grab a different color. All of you guys grab a different color. Because now we're going to go backwards. So here's my arrow going forwards. Let's take this arrow going backwards. So when I say you're going to have to know the equation for photosynthesis, you also have to know the equation for cellular respiration. Hey, focus. If you know the equation for one direction for photosynthesis, you already have the equation for respiration because it's backwards from that. You take in oxygen, you are required to have food, in the case of a carbohydrate, glucose, and from that, one of your waste products is water, one of your waste products is CO2, but the overall point is you're not producing light, you're producing a different form of energy. What's that high energy molecule of the body called? You form ATP. That's the energy that we form. Now, so when we run this backwards, the goal is producing this energy. So stay with me on this here. You remember that big, huge, massive poster I put on the floor and I told you that's all the chemical reactions going on? This is the uber simplified version of what's going on. It's got multiple steps to it. It's got branches that come off of it. Mega simplified. When we go backwards, the same thing is happening. And I want you to be aware of why there has to be more to this. Because ATP is made of atoms. Phosphorus is one of those. Where in here do you see phosphorus? It's nowhere. That tells you that this is a really simplified version. A lot of times they don't even put ATP. They just say, hey, we produce energy. Instead of saying light energy, they'll just put an E here for energy and just leave it at that. We're focused more on ATP, but what that does is it produces the energy that creates the ATP. So again, you have all these extra chemical reactions that are going along in tandem or steps within here that are happening too. So it's not just this little bit of stuff that's going on here. There's more to it than that. So keep that in mind. This is the simplified version. There's a lot more going on than just as right here. So when you complain, before you complain about having to memorize this equation, suck it up because I'm not making you memorize all the other stuff. Okay?
Why aren't you making this?
At this point in biology, there's no need for that. If you take concurrent biology, you'll get a little bit more. If you major in biology, then you'll get to do a lot more than that. Okay. All right, so if I go backwards, I'm still using my purple pen here. If I go backwards, I have cellular respiration. So cellular respiration. If I go forwards, I have photosynthesis. So we have two pieces that we're talking about in there. Okay, so let's talk more in depth about photosynthesis. Okay, where in the plant cell does photosynthesis happen? Yes? Starts with CH. What is it? Chloroplast. And there's a chemical inside the chloroplast called what? Chlorophyll? Yep. So the chloroplast has chlorophyll. It's a chemical that's just a green pigment. It's like a dye. It's just a natural dye. And this is a large chemical that's actually used in the photosynthesis process.
Could it live without that dye?
It can't survive, it can't carry out photosynthesis without that. if you have plants that have a lot of storage, because they store their food, so some plants store more than others. So if they store their food, they can live as long as they have food, but after that, if they don't have enough chlorophyll, they won't be able to live. So if you take a plant and put it in the dark, it'll live for a little while, but not very long.
So if chlorophyll's green pigment, like in the fall, does it change colors or does it just lose all?
Okay, so there's more than chlorophyll in the plants. So chlorophyll, the reason it's green is because you have more chlorophyll than anything else, gentlemen. You have more chlorophyll than anything else, and so that's what we see. In the fall, the chlorophyll is the one that breaks down first. It's just that's the nature of the chemical. So when the chlorophyll breaks down, then you see the other colors that are in there too. So you'll see reds and yellows and kind of goldish color, things like that. Yeah, oranges. Okay, so it occurs in the chloroplast. The chloroplast, draw this. Yes.
Is there a way that you can permanently change a plant's color by changing the color of the pigment? I'm talking like
There might be something edgy genetically that they could do to that.
like not diet. I'm not talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about changing the chemical that's in there. Chlorophyll is the one that carries out the photosynthesis. So the problem with that is if you change the structure of the pigment, it's not going to work the same way.
I'm just saying change the color of the pigment.
If you change the chemical structure, it's not going to be chlorophyll anymore. It's kind of like if you change the chemical structure of water, it's not going to be water anymore.
So you can't.
So then
It
how do
changes
you
it into
get
something
plants
new.
that are like different, like pink and
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, chlorophyll is not the only one they have, but chlorophyll is the one that's used in photosynthesis. There are potatoes that you can get that are blue. I mean, if you cut them open, they're blue. They're almost an inky blue. Yeah. So you can get those. Like you guys talked about sweet potatoes, they have that orange color. So a lot of times they have other chemicals in them. They have other pigments in them, but this is the pigment that's most useful in photosynthesis. And that's obviously what you're going to see mostly in the leaves. There are some plants that, like trees, you can cut the tree bark and it's red underneath. Like the bark underneath is red.
Blue potatoes. Then how do they make them blue? Are they just automatically like that?
Yeah, they're automatic. That's the color they have. Now, and there are lots of colors that they have, and you can breed for those colors. Like you can get online and you can buy. Are you guys really focused on each other? Cut it out. You have one warning. I'm not going to give you another one. You can chat during lunchtime. You got that? Okay. So when you have these other things, they have naturally those pigments, and you can breed so you could get more of those, or you can get lesser colors, just like you breed dogs and cats and stuff like that for certain traits or colors.
Is that how they get? Because there's like white carrots, black carrots, blue carrots, red carrots, green carrots.
Yeah, they'll do some of that. Sometimes they'll, in most cases, they'll do a little genetic engineering, but mostly it's for higher yield.
do they carry out photosynthesis the exact same way, just as much, or is it different?
It has to be the leaves. The only place you're going to get photosynthesis happening is where the chlorophyll is. And so you'll see plants that have green stems. The green stems can carry out photosynthesis. Anything green on it can carry out photosynthesis. But the photosynthesis isn't happening on anything else. So when I look at these plants, I have a faint green to this. So this stem can carry out photosynthesis, but it's not going to carry out much because it's covered up a little, right? So if you have other plants that have brown in them, like this one, this part's not going to be able to carry out photosynthesis. There aren't any green pigments in it. Yeah? But all of this does. And this part is where it stores extra energy. That stuff inside there typically isn't going to be green either.
So if you want to change one color of those leaves, would it affect the rest?
It depends on how you change it. I can inject the dye. You guys have seen flowers, ladies? You guys have seen flowers where they can have a carnation with different colors on them? A lot of times they just inject the dye in there. It's not that they're going to live long that way because they've already been cut.
So you know, like really new trees, how whenever you cut them open, they're like green on the inside, brown on the, like the bark.
Yeah.
So does that do photosynthesis?
No, it did at one point. It did, especially because the bark takes a while to cover up over the green. So it's losing that chlorophyll as time goes by. If you wait, a few months down the road, there won't be as much green on it. Yeah. All right. So it occurs in the chloroplast. Draw this. This is a chloroplast, and the chloroplast has little stacks of membranes in it. So some part of photosynthesis occurs in the stacks. Some part of photosynthesis occurs between the stacks there. So there are two things that are going on in here. But before I get to that, what I want to remind you of is the endosymbiotic theory. Remember that the chloroplast has DNA. The chloroplasts and the mitochondria are the only organelles that have their own DNA. And because of that, they came up with this theory and said, hey, I think that these little organelles, the chloroplast and the mitochondria, used to be little bacteria that lived on their own. They were completely different organisms, and over time, they've gotten a really close symbiotic relationship with another cell, and were ultimately incorporated into that cell. That's what that endosymbiotic theory says. Ancient bacteria, that would be the chloroplast, lived in a close symbiotic relationship with ancient eukaryotes. Eukaryotes have nuclei, right? Ultimately, those bacteria became a part of the cell. Yes? Yeah, sorry. Okay, so they lived in a close, symbiosis means they lived in a really close relationship to each other. If it could be a parasitic relationship, that means one was positively affected, one was negatively affected. If it's mutualistic, which is probably what these were, then it means one was benefited, one gained a benefit from this, and the other gained a benefit from that too. So it was good for both. So they lived close together, and ultimately, that little bacteria got incorporated inside the cell, and it didn't die inside there. It wasn't digested. It lived inside the cell. So whatever was good for that little thing right here, it was making food using photosynthesis, right? And that eukaryotic cell got that. It got the food from that. It didn't have to eat stuff all around it anymore. It could make its own food. Okay, so this photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast. And then again, this is just a reminder of the endosymbiotic theory here. And the job of the whole purpose of the photosynthesis is to convert solar energy to chemical energy. Write this down. So, in other terms, and saying this in a totally different way, it means this uses light to make food. So where is the energy? It's in the chemical bonds that holds that C6H12O6 together. Remember, things that use light to make food are the producers. I don't think you'd have to write that down. I think you guys know that already, yes? So the last thing on here is that this photosynthesis occurs in 2 phases. This is as complex as I'm going to get for you guys. There's a light phase and there's a dark phase. The light phase obviously requires light. And it requires chlorophyll. Okay, so this is why it requires chlorophyll. When you have bigger molecules like chlorophyll, they're made of several different atoms, lots of different atoms hooked up together in a certain way, in a certain shape. And they're held inside these little stroma and grana in here a certain way. So the orientation of the molecules matters. But what happens is the light excites an electron in that chlorophyll molecule. Okay, and yes, that's the scientific term for it. So when the light, okay, so pieces of light are called photons. You've heard of that before, photons? Okay, so light is energy. The smallest packet of energy, smallest quantum of energy that you can have from light is called a photon. Okay, we can measure how much energy. We measure energy in joules or in calories. You guys measure energy in calories. So we can measure the energy of it. The smallest piece of energy you can get is a photon. And the only thing that is tiny enough to be impacted by that photon, that one photon, is an electron. Electrons can be pushed around by a photon. Okay? So the electrons in this chlorophyll molecule, a certain area of the electrons, get bumped around. Specifically, they get excited, and what that means is they jump up away from the nucleus. So you know electrons are in orbits. Hey, your job is to focus. You can do this. Focus. So you've got these electrons in orbits. So when an electron gets excited, light hits it, and it pops up to a new orbit. It can do one of two things. If it makes it all the way up to an orbit, a set orbit, it will keep that energy from the photon, and you will never see it. If it absorbs that energy from the photon and bumps up, but doesn't make it to the next orbit, it spits that photon back out, and you see it as color. That red, all the light that's hitting it, all of the photons are absorbed except for the red light, and it spits it back out, and that's why we see that. If it's yellow, all of the energy from the light, because we've got all the different types of light, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, right? All of the photons are hitting it. The only ones that this dye in this paper can't absorb and keep is the yellow. It spits it back out, and that's what we see as yellow. On the chlorophyll, what color is chlorophyll? Green. It absorbs every photon except the green. It spits it back out.
Could you end up changing that?
So what about white?
White is, okay, so if you're talking about white light, it means that it's all of the colors together. If you're talking about white here, it absorbs no color, it spits it back out. So you're seeing all of the colors. Yeah. Now, let me say this again here, write this down. So when the light hits it, the light energy excites the electron. Lowercase letter e with a negative sign. You guys have used that for electron before?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So it's going to excite an electron in the chlorophyll, and that electron shoots up. It shoots up and it splits a water molecule. So the energy from the photon just changed to energy of motion, right? Kinetic energy. It moved that electron. The electron goes up and splits a water molecule, and that starts a whole chain reaction.
Wait, so what happens if you re-dye a color? Is it? Or
If you change the dye, you change the chemical, then you change which photons can impact it, which photons can be absorbed, and which photons could be spit out, because you change the distances between the electrons and the nucleus.
do you know what a photon is?
It's not the same thing. Yeah. So it's going to excite one of the electrons in the chlorophyll, and I'm going to simplify all this, and it just starts a chain reaction of chemical reactions. So it starts a chain of chemical reactions. And that's as much detail as you need to know about this part. The dark phase, the second phase, it doesn't require dark, it just doesn't require light. So the dark phase doesn't require light. So it can happen anytime during the day or night. It also occurs in the chloroplast. So it's all happening inside the chloroplast. All this process is inside that little organism that we thought was a bacteria a long time ago, an individual separate organism. This is when carbon, so the dark phase, it doesn't have to have light to happen. We've already got the chain reaction started. In the dark phase, this is when carbon is fixed. And I'm going to put it in quotation marks, fixed. That's, again, the proper name for it. Carbon is fixed. And what that means is it takes it from a gas form. What's that gas that plants take in? Carbon dioxide. You can breathe that in and out all day long, and you get squat from that. You can't do anything with that at all. It's just a waste product to your body. Okay? The plants take the gaseous form that we can't use, and they take the carbon out of the gaseous form, and they fix it into a solid form in the form of glucose, C6H12O6. So here, the carbon is fixed into glucose form. Looks like sugar. In a lab? Yeah, if we had the parts to it. So when I say it's fixed, it goes from gaseous carbon, which we can't use, and remember it's all about us, right? to solid. Okay, hang on. I really need to go slap someone out there. They would deserve it too. Okay, so it goes from gaseous CO2 to solid C6H12O6. Art. Okay, somebody had a question. Quade? Okay. Yeah.
So we're talking about the whole light thing and how it's all the colors except the one you see. Why can't animals like the mantis shrimp see like a bajillion more colors than us?
Okay, so there are only, when we talk about visible light, you know that red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. We describe visible light as what humans can see, right? There are other energies of light. So when you talk about it, you've got, okay, so we have UV light, which is ultraviolet. So if we have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, it goes lowest energy, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, to highest energy. So if it's UV light, then it would have to be above this. If it's infrared light, it has to be below red. So it's really just the combinations of when you talk about visible light, it's just the combinations of those. The only other lights that are available to see would be like the ultraviolet or the infrared radio waves. That's all energy given off by the sun. Yeah? Okay, so we have one more little thing that I want you to write down. Okay, hang on. One more little thing that I want you to write down. The key here, the whole important key for us, is that the energy from the sunlight is now in glucose form in the chemical bonds. So those plants have taken actual energy from the sun, and it's now in the glucose in the form of the chemical bonds. Okay, so when we see that C6H12O6, you guys know covalent and ionic, right? Covalent bonds, it requires energy to hold it. Those bonds have energy in them, okay? So when we resituate those bonds, we can either release energy or we can put more energy into it. But it just took the light energy, so here's your conversion. It took the light energy and ultimately converted it into chemical energy. Yes? We can't do that. As humans, our bodies can't do that. Now, we can make machines now like solar panels. We can take it and use the sunlight and make electrical energy, right, with solar panels? But we can't, within our bodies, take the sunlight and change it into chemical energy. The plants can do that. That's what's so important about that. Question?
How do you get like light blue and stuff then if it's...
It depends on how much of